This is a quick run through the manual video mode on the LG V30's native camera app. This mode gives you loads of advanced manual controls that you will not find in any other native camera app on a smartphone. Okay, so the first thing I wanted to show you is something that's actually not exclusive to the manual mode. You can also find it in the automatic video mode on the V30, but I still wanted to mention it. On top of the UI, you find two little boxes with trees in them, and this basically lets you switch between the two rear cameras of the LG V30. Right now, we're in the main camera, but the LG V30 also has a wide-angle camera. So if you tap the multiple trees icon, you can switch to the wide angle, which is pretty cool because it has a totally different field of view. Let's switch back to the main camera. Okay, so let's have a look at the bottom panel with all the manual controls that you get in this manual video mode. On the left-hand side, you get an audio level meter, which is really cool because you can check the audio levels to avoid peaking of the audio and distortion. This is something that you can find in third-party camera apps, but usually not in native camera apps, so this is pretty unique. You also get information about the recording quality, the resolution. In this case, it says Ultra HD. You get the frame rate, 30 frames per second, and you get the bitrate, 52 megabits per second in this instance here. Okay, one more thing I'd like to add is that the audio levels that you're currently seeing in the panel do not really correspond to my voice at the moment, because I'm recording this as a voiceover in post-production. Now let's move on to the next button, which has a microphone icon on it. And if you tap that button, it opens up the audio panel, where you can adjust certain things, like the input gain between minus and plus 20 decibels. You also can apply a low-cut filter at 75 or 150 hertz to cut out lower frequencies. And you also have a limiter that you can apply between 0 and minus 6 dB. You can also turn it off. Then there is a wind noise filter that you can switch on. And another thing, if you have an external mic connected via the headphone jack, or the USB-C port of the device, you can switch to this as the audio input. Now there is one more fantastic feature in the audio control panel that I would like to point out, and this kicks in when you actually start a video recording. Now if you press the button, the recording button, you don't only get the audio levels that I showed you before, but now you even get live audio waveforms within the audio panel. This is extremely helpful to just check your audio recording, your audio levels while recording, and yeah, fantastic feature. Okay, let's stop the recording and let's close the audio panel to move on to the next control function, which is the white balance. And you get a scale in Kelvin, degrees Kelvin, and this goes from 2300 Kelvin up to, let's see, 7500 Kelvin. So you can manually adjust the color temperature here. Okay, next thing is focus. You can adjust the focus manually with the slider. And when you are using manual focus, there's a very helpful feature called focus peaking that you can activate, and that you can usually only find on like bigger cameras. So if you activate focus peaking, what it does is it applies a colored overlay to the areas of the frame that are in focus. So you can see that, you know, certain parts of the image are in focus while others are not. So everything that's green has the green outline here, is in focus, and you can, you know, go back and forth. So you can see how the focus peaking is changing, and it's very helpful. Unfortunately, it does not work when you're recording. It only works before starting the recording. Once you hit the record button, the focus peaking is gone. And if you want to do a little bit of nice rack focus action, then you will have to do so without the help of the focus peaking assistant. Still, it's amazing to have such a feature in a native camera app of a smartphone. Next button is the Eevee button, which stands for exposure value and lets you quickly adjust the exposure without having to set precise values for ISO and shutter speed. Personally, I don't think it's that useful because you can't lock the exposure when using the Eevee dial. You can adjust the exposure, but you can't lock it down. And in most cases, you probably want to lock the exposure when recording. So I would just recommend to stay away from the Eevee button and instead use the ISO and shutter speed parameters to adjust your exposure. The ISO is available from 50 to 3200, although if possible, I would avoid using an ISO over 800 or maybe 1200. When using the shutter speed parameter, it's great that you now have the option of 1/50th of a second compared to my old V10, because in some regions of the world, artificial light sources emit light at 50 Hz, and if you don't have the equivalent shutter speed to match that, you get ugly banding effects in your footage. So there's one more button left in the bottom panel. On the far right, you will find a button with an A and a circling arrow. And this is what I like to call the panic button. And if you ever find yourself lost within all the manual settings here, you can just push that button and everything goes back to auto mode. So after having taken a look at everything in the control panel here, let's head over to the settings menu. And there, first thing you'll find is the frame rate. You get options between 1 and 60 frames per second. 60 frames per second is only available for full HD, not for Ultra HD 4K resolution. And one thing that's missing here are PAL frame rates for the PAL broadcast standard. So 25 and 50 frames per second is not available. That's really unfortunate because with the app being so professional and advanced, you would have thought that LG would include that. And that is something that I really wish the app had. So users in Europe and other regions of the world that use the PAL broadcasting standard could better integrate the V30 into their workflow. Now, this only really matters if you live in such a region and you're producing for broadcast, or you're using the phone in combination with other regular cameras that only shoot 25 or 50 frames per second. If you're directly producing for the web or live in a region that doesn't use the PAL broadcasting standard, then the available frame rates are just fine. Let's move on to the bitrate. There are 3 options available: high, medium, and low. The actual bitrate depends on what resolution and frame rate you are using, but the highest bitrate possible is 52 megabits per second in Ultra HD 4K resolution. Next on the list is the option to turn on Hifi audio recording. This will boost the audio bitrate of the video to an incredible 2400 kilobits per second. Just be aware that because the audio is recorded with PCM codec, not every video editing app or video player will be able to correctly decode the audio. On to what is maybe the standout feature of the LG V30, you can record with a lock profile called LG-Cine Lock here. Recording in lock profile gives you more flexibility in post-production for color grading, and it also gives you a better dynamic range while recording, but you will have to do a little bit of post-production afterwards, because right out of the box, your raw footage will look rather desaturated and dull. Now let's scroll down. Steady recording gives you an additional electronic image stabilization on top of the optical image stabilization. Steady recording is only available in Full HD though, and it crops into the picture. The grayed out options, by the way, are not available in manual mode, in case you're wondering. Tracking focus lets you track faces and moving objects within a frame. Doesn't always work perfectly, but it's still nice to have. Covered lens gives you a warning if you've covered the wide-angle lens, which sometimes happens by accident. The grid will give you an overlay to help you with the image composition. And then finally, under storage, you can select whether files are being recorded to the SD card or the internal storage. Then on the right-hand side, you have a timer that you can set to 3 or 10 seconds before the recording starts. And then there are the resolution options. Ultra HD, Full HD, you get different options here. Full HD 21:9 is interesting. You get like a cinematic widescreen image here. So yeah, you have a couple of options available in terms of resolution and also aspect ratio. To conclude, the LG V30's native camera app is hands down the best native camera app when it comes to manual video controls. It's just amazing what you get here, and I wish every other filmmaker would follow this lead. There are a couple of small things that could be improved, like the addition of PAL frame rates, but other than that, this is pretty much as good as it gets. And that's it for today. I hope this was useful. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I catch you on the next video.